Now, the thing about battles is that once you've had one, everybody knows it. We're going to get that one out next. Sorry, did you mind? Thank you. Everybody knows it. And predictably, every 100 years, there's an anniversary, like the 100th or the 200th. Now, the 100th anniversary, a company called WD&HO Wills, and you all remember them. Come on, don't play the
Woodbines.
Yeah, exactly. And cigarette cards.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, they brought out a set of cigarette cards. This set, that's not an original set. Very few of the original sets exist, and they're worth £3,000 or £4,000 each. Now, it was WD&HO Wills's practice to issue to the directors of the company a set before they went into general issue. And somebody must have said, just a minute, it's 1915. Yes. Well, the French are on our side. Yeah. And the Germans are the enemy. Yes. But you've got them showing it the other way around. At Waterloo, the French were the enemy and the Germans were on our side. Oh, dear. We can't issue those. We'll be a laughing stock. So they were withdrawn. And they never went into. So the only ones that exist, and they really did, the ones issued to directors. And over time, they have leaked into the general population. And there are a few occasions when a rare set of the original Waterloo cigarette cards pop up, to the absolute embarrassment of everybody connected with WD&HO Wills. Now, you'd think they'd never make that mistake again, but they printed a set for Edward VIII's coronation. That one never got into production. Now, speaking of anniversaries, in 2015, amazingly, it was the 200th. And my wife and I went with 135,000 other people. And they fought it over the same battlefield. It's about 6,500 reenactors, horse, foot, and guns. And it was absolutely magnificent. And everything that could happen happened. The Belgians couldn't administer a postage stamp. They really are unutterably useless. They thought they'd steal a march on everybody. So they made a €2 coin with a little scene from the battle on the back of the coin. Now, this is straight out of Yes, Prime Minister or Yes, Minister. There is a rule in the Eurozone that you can issue anything you like on the back of a coin, provided every member state that uses the euro agrees. And somehow the Belgians failed to realize, having made several million of these €2 coins, that they hadn't got everybody's agreement. The French objected. Can you imagine the result? How many have we got? I don't know, 6 or 7 million. How much did they cost to make? How much? It's extremely expensive making coins of any sort. It's even more expensive if, having melted down all the scrap you used to make them, you have to melt them down as well. They had to do something quickly. Fortunately, by the grace of the EU, there is another rule that says you can put any damn thing you like on a non-standard denomination coin, but it's only legal tender in the country that issues it. Are you following me so far? Yeah. So they made 600,000 €2.5 coins. 600,000. Now, the whereabouts of 59,996 are unknown, but I've got the other 4. Here they are. Now, you can only get these in Belgium. If you find them in your change, I'll buy off you for 20 quid, because that's what they're worth. Handle with care. Now, there are 4, just to tell you, there are 4, right? €2.5 coins. And on the back is a scene from the Battle of Waterloo. Right, catch it. Stuffed and mounted. It must have been one of the cock-ups of the century, and the Belgians would have been highly embarrassed. So the truth has never been actually divulged, exactly what it cost. But it does go down in history of one of the most amazing things. Now, coming back to the bridge. Waterloo Bridge having been knocked down, you've now got a pile of rubble. You can use what you can to construct a new bridge, but you're bound to be left with some rubble. So somebody somewhere said, what should we do with the rubble? And someone somewhere else said, let's send some to New Zealand. Now, it's not the first thought that comes into your head. Why would we want to send it? Well, it's Wellington, you see. What's Wellington? The capital of New Zealand, you idiot. Oh, yeah, so it is. So they sent a crate of Waterloo Bridge stone to New Zealand. Now, you know all these nothing to declare programs. You can imagine this crate turning up. What's in it? I don't know. Well, open it. It's a present from the UK. Oh, how lovely. Open it up. What's in it? Rock. What do you mean rock? Cubes of rock. What the hell are they saying us cubes of rock for? Well, apparently it's from the bridge. What do we want it for? I don't know. What should we do with it? I don't bloody know. It turns out there's a short-haired Airedale. Oh, God. There's a dog, an Airedale, called Paddy the Wanderer, who wandered the docks of Wellington. And the wharfingers and seamen and all the folk associated with the dock paid his annual dog license and made sure he had his injections and all the rest. And Paddy the Wanderer was famous in New Zealand dockland. And he's called the Wanderer because he used to go on board ship. It said he actually once went to America and back. It's probably apocryphal, but he certainly got to places where most dogs don't get. Anyway, as is the nature of things, this is the late 1920s into the early 1930s. And one June or July night, because it's winter then, so he died of cold, which was very sad. And a little light bulb went off in somebody's head, and they said, I know what we can do with those bloody rocks they send us from England. And they did. This is Paddy the Wanderer's memorial, made of stone from the original Waterloo Bridge. I haven't encapsulated it because some pillock has stuck a Smurf on top of it, and I want to find a perfect picture before I encapsulate it. So I show it you with a certain amount of embarrassment because the Smurf has nothing whatsoever to do with it. There you go, Smurf notwithstanding. Napoleon escaped. He went back to Paris, and instead of getting stuck into the job, he had a bath. And while he was having a bath, people were conspiring to make sure he didn't do it again. And in fact, although he volunteered to fight as an ordinary general, well, almost ordinary general, that was turned down, and he was effectively put in house arrest. He abdicated, and then he wanted to escape. He wanted to go to America, where he thought he would find a good home, but they seemed very keen on that. So eventually he gave himself up to the British and was taken to Rochefort. Although he got passports, he went eventually on the British ship Bellerophon, known to all and sundry in the Navy as the Billy Ruffian. Now, the Billy Ruffian fought at Trafalgar and had the mast shot out of it. It was reduced to a near wreck, but it was rebuilt and happened to be the ship standing off the coast when Napoleon surrendered. Now, Napoleon wanted to be taken to England and treated as a country squire. Actually, I wouldn't mind being taken to England and treated as a country squire. But anyway, besides the point, the British did not want Napoleon on British soil. Now, as long as he's on board ship, by a curious evolution of law, England, Britain at that time had two lots of law, maritime law and land law, for want of a better description. And Napoleon was subject to maritime law. So as long as he didn't set foot on English soil, he was under maritime law, and they couldn't then issue a writ of habeas corpus and all the other things that go with it, he's a prisoner of war. Okay, what happens when we sign the peace? What do you mean? We can't have prisoners of war in peacetime. It's a contradiction in terms. Oh, what should we do? So what the politicians did was they stayed at war with Napoleon as an individual. They had peace with France, but not peace with Napoleon, which is a turn of the law which would go down well today, I'm sure. Keep lawyers in work for 20 years. They didn't know what to do with him. And eventually the thought came to them. People rowed out into Plymouth Sound to look at him. People drowned rowing out to look at him. And he'd come on deck and walk up and down looking haughty. Eventually they stuck him on Northumberland. He said, where are we going? And they said, St. Helena. And he said something like, "Where is St. Helena?" And they said, "It's the farthest place on earth from anywhere else on earth." And you might then think, well, if they sent him to St. Helena, what's the difference between British soil on St. Helena and British soil in Portsmouth? St. Helena wasn't British. St. Helena was owned by the East India Company. It was not British soil. So they couldn't claim writs of habeas corpus. And he was imprisoned on St. Helena until he died probably of cancer, certainly not of eating wallpaper. There's this ludicrous story that the arsenic in his wallpaper killed him. I don't know how much wallpaper you'd have to eat, but it's a phenomenal amount. There is a book called The Murder of Napoleon, which says he was murdered by arsenic poisoning. He wasn't. He died of stomach cancer, like several of his, one of his brothers and his father. It was a deadly gene. He'd had stomach problems all his life. So that was the end of Napoleon, and he was buried on St. Helena under the auspices of a man called Sir Hudson Lowe, a most unpleasant individual, a real prig of a man who died eventually in poverty because nobody liked him. But Napoleon fared a little better because once everything had settled down again, the French government of Napoleon III, who was Napoleon's nephew, petitioned to have his body brought back to France. And the British government didn't particularly object. So he was dug up and brought back to France and buried. All the old grenadiers got out their uniforms, bashed the moths out of them, and stood to order. And Napoleon came back. It was freezing in November, and it was freezing cold. He was hours late, and they were all shivering like hell. And he came back, and he was buried in Les Invalides. Anybody seen Napoleon's tomb in Les Invalides?
Yeah.
And you have to bow to look at his tomb because the track you're walking on is above. So if you want to see it, you have to look down. And that's quite a clever trick, that. Marshal Ney was proscribed. They were quite determined to shoot somebody. And Marshal Ney was one of those they chose to shoot. He objected. Well, who wouldn't? And he wanted to be tried by his peers. So they tried him by his peers. And they agreed to shoot him as well, which was rather disconcerting because some of them were fellow marshals of France who he might have considered his friend. But you find out who your friends are when it comes to being shot. Anyway, on December the 7th, just outside the Luxembourg Garden, a corporal's guard, 12 troopers, which is 4 sergeants, 4 corporals, and 4 ordinary private soldiers, lined up, put him against a wall, and Marshal Ney gave the order to fire. Now that takes a bit of chutzpah, that does, and 11 of them hit him and 1 missed. And he did miss because he hit the wall way above. And it's always felt like that soldier knew of the wonderful things that Marshal Ney had done, the brave things that he'd done, and wouldn't shoot him. Anyway, he was dead and buried. And that was the end of Marshal Ney almost. Because in the mid-1800s in North Carolina, a man called Peter Stewart Ney died. Now, that's entirely unremarkable. Except on his deathbed, he said, "I am Ney of France." Now, the Americans, who have no history of their own, are always up for Americans here, I for God's sake, are always up for a conspiracy theory. So Peter was Marshal Ney's father's name. And they said, "That's Ney, that's Marshal Ney." Yeah, it can't be. It's Marshal Ney. So they put a big stone on his tomb and said, "This is Marshal Ney," and buried him. Now, history reports that they dug him up at least twice between the time he was buried in the mid-1840s to up to 1920s. And amazingly, he was still there. This is ridiculous. Why do you keep digging him up? What are you expecting him to do? The strange thing is, I thought they might dig him up on the 200th anniversary because now DNA would prove absolutely whether he was Marshal Ney or not. So the Americans didn't dig him up, which means they must rather enjoy the element of doubt rather than proof, which I've always suspected. The French were made to pay an indemnity so that it could be shared out with the British Army. They were charged to pay 1 million francs, which when converted into English money was 990-something pounds. This was divided into 16 equal amounts. 4/16, or 1/4 of the sum, was distributed among the private soldiers, who each got £2.11 falls. One share went to the Duke of Wellington, who got £61,178, 3 shillings and 5 8p. Now that shows you two things. One, the divide between the poor infantryman and the Duke of Wellington, and how ridiculously pernickety the mathematician was who worked out that £61,148, 3 shillings and 5 8p is, well, who knows? I'm sure it's mathematically correct, but it shows a really poor grasp of humanity as far as I'm concerned. But there we are. That's how it was done in those days. And with his share, Wellington is said to have contributed some back to resurrecting charities for the fallen. But he was a rich man by then. They'd offered Uxbridge £1,200 a year for his losing his leg, and he turned it down. Said, "No, I don't need that." Wellington decided he wanted a picture to remind him by. I'm afraid you're on again, sir, and you're on the end one. So he commissioned a man called David Wilkie to paint him this picture. And this is the Chelsea pensioners receiving the news of Waterloo. And they're looking quite excited. But it's the sort of picture, you can look at it 10 times, and each time you'll see another detail. There's a black man on there, just to prove that black men, I won't be able to find him now, just to prove that black men aren't as scarce as you might. Can anybody see a black man? Because I know he's there. I certainly can't. Not from here anyway, but in a creek man. Yeah, there he is. Yeah. Wellington paid 1,200 guineas for that, which is about £250,000 in modern money. Though he was quite pleased. It hangs in Apsley House, number 1 London, his London house, which, by the way, during the Corn Laws riots, people threw rocks at his house and broke his windows. So he put shutters up, iron shutters. And that's where he got the name the Iron Duke. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with fighting the French. It's because he put the iron shutters up on his house to stop his windows getting broken. And in 1829, he was Prime Minister, one of the most reactionary far-right Prime Ministers. And he was all for Catholic emancipation. And somebody wrote, well, in fact, the Earl of Winchelsea, a most famous peer, I'm sure the tip of your tongue is always inhabited by the Earl of Winchelsea, wrote in the Times that Wellington wanted to put a Catholic into every major office of state in the country. And Wellington took offence and challenged him to a duel. Now, all through his military life, Wellington had forbidden his officers to fight duels. He didn't mind them being killed by the French, but he was damned if they were going to kill each other. He considered that to be a waste. Nonetheless, he was so piqued that anyway, they met on Battersea Fields, seconds, pistols, the whole thing. And they stood the prescribed distance apart with a loaded pistol each. And Wellington fired first. Now, those who are in favour of Wellington say he missed on purpose. And those who are against Wellington said he couldn't hit a barn door with a blunderbuss. And he didn't miss on purpose, he missed because he couldn't shoot straight. So we don't know which is the truth, but whatever the truth is, he missed. And now the Earl of Winchelsea, who nobody's ever heard of, has got a gun in his hand, loaded, and in front of him, from me to that gentleman at the back, is the most famous Briton alive, and I have the opportunity to shoot him dead. What am I going to do? Fortunately for posterity, the Earl of Winchelsea took the coward's way out, shot his gun in the air, and then wrote a grovelling apology in the paper in which he'd written the piece in the first place. Quite amazing. Absolutely fighting duels. The Times of London, as the Times was prone to do, did not have a headline saying Waterloo won. It had the usual adverts that it always had on the front. So Waterloo didn't rank higher than Thomas ever. So is it on page 2? No. There's an interesting article on page 2 about flogging and whether people should be flogged with 1,000 lashes or whatever. And by the time you get to page 3, don't get overly excited. British killed and wounded. Times official. Thursday morning, 8 o'clock. Thursday, mark you. The battle was the previous Sunday. Stop press. Lord Mayor, blah-de-blah. I have the honour, yada-blah. British killed and wounded. Duke of Brunswick, Lieutenant Thomas Picton, Ponsonby, Duplat, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. A whole heap of, would you want to pass this round? You're not to read it. You can just pass it round. I'm going to fold it back on itself so you can see. Now, this was a huge loss of life in the aristocracy, the top of which was the Duke of Brunswick. Now, as it turns out, the Prince Regent was married to Caroline of Brunswick. I hated the sight of the woman, couldn't stand her at any price. But the relation now, the Duke of Brunswick, been shot off his horse and killed. So etiquette, royal etiquette demanded a period of mourning for 2 months. Now, for 1 month, it was deep mourning, and what you wore was prescribed: black crepe stuff, headgear and crepe stuff, black shoes, clothes, buttons, goodness knows what. It was, every detail was written down, and for a month, you went around in deep mourning. Then there was 2 weeks of medium mourning, and then there was 2 weeks of light mourning. So for a month, they were very sad. For 2 weeks, they were quite sad, and for a couple of weeks, they weren't really bothered, but thought they ought to do it anyway. Magnificent. The poet laureate, one Robert Southey, wrote a poem. Hideous lie the heaps of slain on Waterloo's immortal plain, but none by sabre or by shot fell half as flat as Walter Scott. Walter Scott wrote a poem. He'd been very successful with a poem called Marmion. So he tried to recreate that. It was awful. He wrote a poem about Waterloo, which was absolutely awful. And he had to eat his hat really, and give up. But he did give all the proceedings from the sale of the poem to the charity. So there we are. I could go on for another quarter now, but I won't. Waterloo ripples through time. It still does. At the 200th anniversary, everybody who could write, string 2 words together on the subject did so. And some of the rubbish they wrote was unbelievable. One headline I saw in a magazine: none of us know what happened on the 17th of June. And that's true, because the battle's on the 18th. And you think, don't you check? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a time when the Battle of Waterloo is the most named battle in the English-speaking world. And long may it continue to be so. None of us will live to see the 300th anniversary, but I hope they get another 165,000 there, and the Belgians don't issue another €2.50 coin. Thank you very much.
€2.50, not 2.5.
Oh, well, is it 2.5? I don't know what it says. Though.
It does, yeah.
2.5. Is it 2.5?
Yeah.
Who's got one?
€2.50.
Yeah, is that what it says?
Yes.
Oh, right. Well, there you are then. It's Belgians, isn't it? When we stayed there, they wanted 2 people wanted to join adjoining rooms. So there was one on the first floor, one on the 6th. Somebody was disabled, wanted a ground floor. They were on the 3rd floor. It was just chaotic. Chaotic.
How long did Wellington live for?
Mid 1850s, 1854, he died in Walmer Castle. Just drifted away in his sleep. And he was in his 80s. He lived a good life, a good long life. His horse didn't. Anything they could name, they named. It's amazing how many places are named that people don't realise. There's an awful lot of Inkerman Drives and Alma Closes. And I bet the people living there don't know their battles of the Crimean War. So it's just because they only picked Waterloo because it sounds English. If they called it what it should be, Mont Saint-Jean, it would sound particularly French. We're the only ones that call it Waterloo. The Germans call it the Battle of La Belle Alliance, and the French don't call it anything. They prefer to forget about it. There are 3 places in London named after Napoleonic battles. What are they? 2 are easy. Trafalgar Square, yes, obviously. And we've just said one. Waterloo Station. What's the other one? Maida Vale. The Battle of Maida is in Italy, and we had a little army in Sicily, and we nipped across under a general called John Stewart, whacked the French, and then nipped back at the Battle of Maida. You're a pleasure to talk to.
Thank you again. Another round of applause, I think.